Chapter 3. At Miss Havisham's. One evening, about 2 years later, Joe and I were sitting together by the fire. Mrs. Joe had gone to town with Uncle Pumblechook in the pony cart. I had learned to read and write a little, and Joe was very proud of me. I was trying to teach him the alphabet, but the only letters he could recognise were J, O, and E. "I think it's too late for me to learn, Pip, old chap," Joe said sadly. "I never went to school. My mother wanted me to go to school, but my father would not let me. He was a hard man, Pip. My father was a blacksmith. He kept me away from school and made me work for him. He was cruel to my mother and often beat her." "That's why I let your sister do what she wants," Joe explained. "She's hard on you, I know, Pip, but she has a good heart. She looked after you when your mother and father died. She was looking after you when she agreed to marry me. 'Bring the poor little child,' I told her. 'There's room at the forge for him.'" I began to cry and to thank Joe for his kindness. I knew what a good friend he was to me. It was now 8 o'clock and dark outside. Joe put more coal on the fire. We stood by the door and listened for the sound of Uncle Pumblechook's pony cart. Not long afterwards, my sister and Uncle Pumblechook arrived. They stood and warmed themselves by our kitchen fire. As Mrs. Joe took off her bonnet and shawl, she looked at me sharply.
"Well, this boy should be grateful to me now," she cried.
Joe and I looked at each other in surprise.
"Quite right," Uncle Pumblechook replied. "He should be grateful for the opportunity she's given him."
Joe and I were even more surprised.
"Well, what are you staring at?"
Mrs. Joe snapped. Her face was redder than ever with the cold. She was mentioned," Joe began politely.
"Miss Havisham isn't a he, I suppose?"
my sister answered sharply. "Miss Havisham who lives in town?" Joe asked in surprise. "How does Miss Havisham know Pip? She never leaves her house, does she?"
"She doesn't know Pip, but she does know Uncle Pumblechook," Mrs. Joe explained impatiently. "She wants a boy to go to her house and play. Uncle Pumblechook kindly mentioned this boy here. So, he's going back to town with Uncle Pumblechook tonight, and tomorrow he'll play at Miss Havisham's, or I'll play with him."
Without another word, Mrs. Joe grabbed hold of me with her bony hands. She washed and scrubbed me until I could hardly breathe. Then I was dressed in my best clothes and given to Uncle Pumblechook. "Goodbye, Joe," I cried as I was pushed out of the door by Mrs. Joe.
"Goodbye, and God bless you, Pip, old chap,"
Joe answered. In a moment, I was sitting in Uncle Pumblechook's pony cart, and we were on our way to town. At 10 o'clock the next morning, Uncle Pumblechook drove me to Satis house, where Miss Havisham lived. The house was very big and gloomy. The tall iron gates in front of the house were locked. Uncle Pumblechook rang the bell, and we waited. In a few minutes, a beautifully dressed girl came across the paved courtyard towards us. She was very pretty, and she looked very proud. "What name?" the girl asked.
"Pumblechook, and this is Pip,"
Uncle Pumblechook answered politely. "This is Pip, is it?" the girl said, looking at me scornfully. "Come in, Pip." The girl was carrying a large bunch of keys. She unlocked the gate with one of them and held the gate open. I went in, and Uncle Pumblechook started to follow, but the girl stopped him. "Do you wish to see Miss Havisham?" she asked.
"If Miss Havisham wishes to see me,"
Uncle Pumblechook began. "But she doesn't," the girl said sharply. "Come along, boy." She locked the gate and led me across the courtyard. It was clean, but grass grew between the stones, as though no one ever walked there. I saw now that the girl was about my age, but she was so beautiful and so proud that she seemed much older. The big front door had chains across it. We walked on to a side door, and the girl opened it. Inside the house, everything was dark. The curtains were drawn, and the shutters were closed on all the windows. The girl picked up a burning candle, and this was our only light. She led me along several dark passages and up a wide staircase. At last, we came to a door where the girl stopped. "Go in," she said. "After you, miss," I whispered politely.
"Don't be silly. I'm not going in,"
the girl answered, and she walked away, taking the candle with her. Feeling very afraid, I knocked at the door.
"Come in,"
a woman's voice said quietly. I opened the door slowly and went inside. I looked around me in the greatest surprise. The room was large and full of furniture, but heavy curtains shut out the daylight, and the room was lit only by candles. I saw that I was in a lady's dressing room, and at the dressing table sat the strangest lady I had ever seen. She was dressed richly in satin and lace clothes, and everything she wore was white. A long white wedding veil hung down from her head. I saw with surprise that the lady's hair was white too. She wore bright jewels, and there were other jewels lying on the table in front of her. One of her shoes lay on the floor. The other one was lying on the dressing table. Her elbow was on the dressing table, and she was resting her face on her hand. Trunks full of clothes were placed about the room. Each one contained many silk and satin dresses, but the dresses were faded and torn. And then I saw that everything that had once been white was now faded and yellow. The fair young bride was now an old woman whose skin was yellow and wrinkled. Only her dark eyes showed that she was alive. Then the lady moved, and those dark eyes stared at me.
"Who is it?"
she asked.
"Pip, ma'am. Mr. Pumblechook's boy. I've come to play." "Come here. Let me look at you," the lady said.
I moved nearer, but I was afraid to look at her. Then I saw that a watch on the dressing table had stopped at 20 to 9.
"Are you afraid to look at me?" the lady asked me slowly. "Are you afraid to look at a woman who hasn't seen the sunshine since before you were born?" "Look here," Miss Havisham whispered, touching her heart. "My heart is broken. Broken! And I am so tired. But I thought I would like to see a child play. So play, boy, play!"
I stood there, unable to move, not knowing what to do.
"Call Estella," Miss Havisham said at last. "Go to the door and call her."
I was afraid, but I had to do what she asked. So I opened the door. I called out several times. Then I saw the girl walking towards me, the candle in her hand. Miss Havisham smiled as the beautiful girl came into the room. She held a jewel against Estella's pretty brown hair.
"My jewels will be yours one day,"
Miss Havisham said quietly.
"Now I want you to play cards with this boy."
"This boy? But he's so common," Estella exclaimed. "Look at his clothes. He's just a common working boy."
"Never mind," Miss Havisham whispered. "You can break his heart, can't you?"
So I played cards with Estella. When I made mistakes, she laughed at me, and so of course I made more. "What rough hands this boy has!" Estella exclaimed as I held the cards. "And what heavy boots he's wearing!"
"Why don't you answer her, Pip?"
Miss Havisham said at last.
She says cruel things about you. What do you think of her?"
"I don't want to say," I replied.
"Whisper to me,"
Miss Havisham said, bending down. "I think she is very proud," I said quietly.
"Yes? And what else?"
"I think she is very pretty," I went on.
"Anything else?"
"I think she is very rude. And please," I added, "I should like to go home now."
"Finish your game of cards first,"
Miss Havisham said. When Estella had won the last game, she threw the cards down with a scornful smile.
"Come here again in 6 days, Pip,"
Miss Havisham said as I was leaving.
"Take him downstairs, Estella. Give him something to eat and drink before he goes."
I followed Estella down the gloomy stairs and along the dark corridors. She opened the side door, and the bright daylight hurt my eyes and confused me. Estella told me to wait in the courtyard. In a few minutes, she returned with some meat and bread. She placed the food on the ground, as though I was a dog. Tears came into my eyes. I turned my head away so that Estella would not see me crying. But when she had gone, I cried aloud and kicked the wall with a heavy boot she had laughed at. After a time, Estella returned with her keys and unlocked the iron gate. "Why aren't you crying?" she asked me with a smile. "Because I don't want to," I replied. "Yes, you do," she said. "Your eyes are red with crying. You're nearly crying now." She laughed, pushed me outside the gate and locked it behind me. I went straight back to Uncle Pumblechook's, but he was not at home, so I began the long walk back to the forge alone. As I walked along, I thought about the strange things I had seen. I thought of Estella and her scorn. She had made me ashamed of my clothes, my boots, and most of all, myself. I wished I had never seen her. But then I remembered how beautiful she was. Chapter 4. The Pale Young Gentleman. When I got home, my sister made me sit on a stool and began asking me questions.
"Tell me what Miss Havisham looks like,"
my sister demanded.
"What did she say to you? What did you do?"
"Miss Havisham's very tall and dark," I answered quickly. "She was sitting in a black velvet coach. There was a girl with her. She gave us cake on gold plates."
"Gold plates,"
Mrs. Joe repeated slowly. Then she added,
"I hope you pleased her. She wanted you to play. Did you?"
"Oh, yes. We played with flags," I said. "And then we shouted and waved our swords."
"Swords?"
"Yes. The girl, Estella, got them from a cupboard. And there was no daylight in the room. Only candles." Joe's eyes opened very wide. Why was I telling all these lies? I do not know. Perhaps the truth was too strange. My visit to Miss Havisham had confused and frightened me, and Estella's words had hurt me. She had called me a common working boy. What would she think of Joe? How heavy his boots were. The following week, I walked to Miss Havisham's alone. As before, Estella unlocked the gate and took me into the house. "Am I pretty?" she said suddenly, holding up the candle. "Yes, very pretty," I answered.
"Am I rude?"
"Not so rude as last time."
"Not so rude?"
Estella repeated angrily, and she slapped my face hard.
"What do you think now?"
she asked. "I won't tell you," I said. Then why don't you cry, you horrid common boy? I'm not crying. I'll never cry for you again, I answered. But I was crying as I spoke. And God knows, I cried for Estella many, many times afterwards. As we were going upstairs, we passed a tall man with sharp eyes and thick black eyebrows. His large hands were very clean and white.
Who's this?
The man asked, staring at me. Only a boy, Estella answered. The man held my chin in his hand and stared into my eyes.
Why are you here?
He asked. Miss Havisham asked me to come, I whispered.
Did she? Then behave yourself,
the man said as he went on down the stairs. Miss Havisham was sitting in her dressing room. She was wearing the same torn dress as before. Everything in the room was the same.
So, you're back again, Miss Havisham said. Are you ready to play today?
I was too frightened to answer.
Well, if you can't play, can you work? Miss Havisham asked.
Yes, ma'am.
Then go into the room on the other side of the corridor. Wait there till I come.
The room I entered was very big. In the middle of the room was a long table. By the light of the fire and the many candles, I saw that the torn tablecloth was covered with dust. There was something tall and white on the table, too. It was covered with dust, and fat black spiders were running all over it. Miss Havisham came into the room and stood behind me. She placed her hand on my shoulder and pointed at the table with a walking stick.
Look, Pip, she said. Can you see my wedding cake? Eaten by mice and spiders. Ruined.
Miss Havisham held my shoulder hard with her thin hand.
Help me walk, Pip, she said.
We walked slowly round and round the long table, the strange old lady leaning on my shoulder.
Today is my birthday, Pip, Miss Havisham said. Many years ago it should have been my wedding day. The dress I am wearing now was new then, and I was young. Everything is old and ruined now. Time has ruined me too, and broken my heart.
What could I say? We stood there, very quiet in the candlelight.
Call Estella, Miss Havisham said at last. Play with her again. I want to see her beat you at cards again.
So Estella and I played cards. She won every game. Miss Havisham smiled and held bright jewels against Estella's hair. How beautiful the proud girl looked. Miss Havisham was soon tired, and I was sent downstairs. When I had eaten, I walked sadly through the courtyard and into an overgrown garden. No one had looked after the garden for years. Weeds grew everywhere. Turning a corner, I came face to face with a fair-haired boy of my own age.
"Hello," said this pale young gentleman. "Who let you in?"
Miss Estella, I answered.
"Oh, did she? Then let's fight."
I stared at the boy in surprise. Then suddenly he pulled my hair and hit me hard in the stomach with his head. I was so surprised that I hit him hard.
"So, you do want to fight, do you?" the pale young gentleman cried.
"Come on, then."
Then he raised his fist like a boxer and began waving them in front of my face. I hit him again, and he fell backwards onto the ground. When he got up, his nose was bleeding. A minute later, I had hit him in the eye. "You've won," he said weakly. "Shake hands." So we shook hands, and the young gentleman walked quietly away. Estella was waiting for me at the gate. Her eyes were bright and shining. I knew she'd been watching the fight. "You can kiss me if you like," she said. I was confused but happy. I kissed her gently on the cheek. A few minutes later, I began my long walk home. From that day onwards, I visited Miss Havisham 3 times a week. I did not see the pale young gentleman again, but Estella was always there. On every visit, I pushed Miss Havisham round and round those 2 rooms in a wheelchair. She did not walk with me again. Instead, I pushed her in her chair. As I walked behind her, Miss Havisham questioned me. I told her I was going to be apprenticed to Joe when I was old enough. I told her that I knew nothing, but wanted to know everything. I told her I wanted to be educated. I told her how I wanted to be a gentleman. Perhaps I hoped that Miss Havisham would pay for my education, but she never suggested it. Sometimes Estella was kind to me, but more often she was rude and cruel. I could not understand this proud, beautiful girl who had made me so unhappy. Chapter 5. I must become a gentleman. My life went on without change for 2 or 3 years. One day, Miss Havisham looked up at me and said,
"You're getting tall, Pip. What is the name of your brother-in-law, the blacksmith?"
"Joe Gargery, ma'am," I answered.
"It is time for you to be apprenticed to him," Miss Havisham said. "Bring him with you one day. Bring him soon."
So, 2 days later, Joe put on his Sunday clothes and boots. Looking very awkward and uncomfortable, he walked with me to Satis house, where Miss Havisham lived. Estella opened the gate for us. She smiled scornfully at Joe, and I felt ashamed of him. Joe was so afraid of Miss Havisham that he refused to look at her. He stood near the door, turning his hat round and round in his strong hands. Miss Havisham picked up a little bag from her dressing table. She held it out to Joe.
"It is time Pip became your apprentice," she said. "Pip has earned his premium, and here it is. There are 25 guineas in this bag, Pip," she said to me. "Give them to Joe Gargery. He is your master now. Goodbye."
And she turned away. I looked at Miss Havisham and Estella in despair. "But don't you want me to come again, Miss Havisham?" I asked.
"No, Pip. Gargery is your master, and you must work for him. Pip has been a good boy here," Miss Havisham said to Joe. "This money is his reward. You are an honest man, and will not expect more. Let them out, Estella."
Bitterly disappointed, I led Joe from that strange room. He walked like a man in a dream. And so I became a blacksmith. From that day I lived in fear. Fear that Estella might see me at work with my dirty face and dirty hands. In my mind, I saw her beautiful face, with its hard, scornful smile. A year passed. I still thought about Estella every day. I longed to see Estella again. So I decided to go to Satis house. I asked Joe for a holiday, and he agreed to close the forge for a day. When I reached Satis house, the gate was opened by a servant.
"I hope you want nothing more, Pip. You'll get no more money from me," Miss Havisham said when she saw me.
"That is not why I am here, Miss Havisham," I replied. "I want you to know I am doing well in my apprenticeship, that is all. I shall always be grateful to you."
"Well, Pip, you can come and see me sometimes," Miss Havisham answered. "Come every year on your birthday. As you see, I am alone now."
I hope Estella is well," I said.
"Estella is very well," Miss Havisham replied, "and she is more beautiful than ever. She is in France,
Being educated to be a lady. Do you feel that you have lost her, Pip?" she added with a cruel smile. I could not answer. Miss Havisham laughed. I said goodbye to her and walked sadly home. When I reached the forge, I was surprised to see a crowd of people outside. I ran into the kitchen. Joe was there, and the doctor. My poor sister, Mrs. Joe Gargery, was lying quiet and still on the floor. Someone had attacked Mrs. Joe when she was alone in the house. She was not dead, but terribly injured, unable to walk or speak. My sister lay in bed for many weeks. At last, she was able to sit downstairs, but her sharp voice was quiet forever. She never spoke again. From that day onwards, someone had to look after Mrs. Joe all the time. And so, Biddy came into our lives. Biddy was the same age as me, but she was not beautiful like Estella. How could she be beautiful? She was only a common girl from the village. But Biddy's eyes were bright. She had a sweet smile and was sensible and kind. The years passed. I visited Satis house every year on my birthday. I never saw Estella, but I did not forget her. I longed to be educated like Estella. I wanted Estella to think well of me and to like me. I wanted Estella's respect and admiration. How stupid I was. It was summer. One Sunday afternoon, Biddy and I went for a walk on the marshes. There were ships on the river, sailing slowly towards the sea. I remembered Estella, far away in another country. I began, as usual, to dream of my plans for the future. We sat down by the river and watched the water flow slowly by. "Biddy, I am going to tell you a secret," I said. "You must never speak of it to anyone." Biddy looked at me in surprise. She promised to tell no one. "Biddy," I went on, "I hate being a blacksmith like Joe. I want to be a gentleman." Biddy smiled and shook her head. "Oh no, Pip," she answered. "That wouldn't be right at all." "But I have important reasons for wanting to be a gentleman," I told her. "Don't you think you are happier as you are, Pip?" Biddy said gently. "Happy?" I repeated. "I can never be happy here, Biddy. Someone I admire and respect very much said I'm stupid and common. I must become a gentleman. I must." "Who called you stupid and common?" Biddy asked. "That was not a true or a polite thing to say." "A young lady I met at Miss Havisham's," I replied. "The young lady is beautiful, and I love her very much. She is the reason why I must become a gentleman." "Do you want to be a gentleman to hurt her, or to make her respect you?" Biddy asked me quietly. "I don't know." "I think you should forget her," Biddy said. "She has been rude and cruel to you. The young lady is not worth your respect." "You may be right, Biddy," I said. "I believe you are, but I love her very, very much." Tears came into my eyes. I threw myself on the ground in despair. Biddy touched my hair gently. "Thank you for telling me this, Pip," she said. "I will always keep your secret." I sat up. "And I will always tell you everything, Biddy dear," I said. "Yes, I'm sure you will, Pip," Biddy replied. She smiled sadly. But I had not told Biddy everything. I believed that Miss Havisham had plans for me. I hoped that she would give me money for my education, money to make me a gentleman. If I had money and education, Estella would love me as I loved her. I hoped that Miss Havisham would make it possible for me to marry Estella.